Welcome to another deep dive. We're tackling David's dying song this time, a sermon by C.H. Spurgeon.
Oh, yeah, I know Spurgeon. He was a preacher back in the 1800s. Super popular.
Right. And this sermon is his take on some of the last words of King David, from the Bible, of course.
It's amazing how these old texts can still feel so relevant.
Absolutely. Spurgeon had a way of making them come alive for his audience, like right at the beginning.
Oh, yeah. What'd he say?
He starts talking about how we all have these all-those in our lives.
Hmm.
It's that thing where you think, okay, things are going pretty well, although.
I like that. It's so true, though, isn't it? Life's never perfect, no matter what.
Exactly. Spurgeon uses King David as the perfect example. I mean, here's this guy, a powerful king, a warrior, a poet, the whole nine yards. But even David had his all those.
So what were David's all those? What was Spurgeon getting at?
Well, Spurgeon points out that some of David's deepest sorrows came from struggles within his own family.
That makes sense. Family stuff can be really tough, even for someone like King David.
Yeah, Spurgeon even compares it to having a lion prowling around inside your house. Like, it's one thing to face danger out in the world, but when it's right there in your home, with your family, it just hits different.
It's like that saying, you can choose your friends, but not your family.
Right. Those bonds run deep, and when those relationships get messed up, it can be incredibly painful.
It sounds like Spurgeon really got that. He wasn't afraid to talk about the hard stuff, was he?
Not at all. And I think that's why his message is so powerful. He acknowledges all those, the things we all go through, and then he points us toward a source of hope. Kind of like in that story he tells about the dying man.
Oh, yeah. What was that about?
It's about this man who's so weak he can barely speak. And he asks God to incline his ear so he can hear his faint voice.
Wow, that's a powerful image. It's like even when we feel our weakest, we can still reach out to something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. It's like there's this incredible intimacy and connection we can have with God, even in our darkest moments. You know, we can whisper those fears, all those, and know that we're being heard.
It's that direct line to something beyond ourselves, right? And it's available to anyone.
Absolutely. It's like finding a source of strength and peace in the middle of all the chaos.
Yeah.
Okay, but here's the thing that really grabbed me. David is going through some serious stuff, but he doesn't wallow in despair. Instead, he finds peace and assurance in this idea of God's covenant.
The covenant, huh? That's a big concept. What did Spurgeon have to say about that?
Well, he spends a lot of time unpacking this idea. But basically, a covenant is like an unbreakable promise. And this specific covenant that he's talking about is between God and humanity, established through Jesus.
Oh, right. So it's like no matter what we do, God's love is there.
That's it. It's unwavering. And here's the thing Spurgeon really emphasized. It's not based on us being good enough.
Wait, so it's not like we have to earn it or something?
Exactly. That's what Spurgeon is getting at. It's not about our efforts, it's about God's grace. It's a gift.
I'm starting to see why people loved Spurgeon so much. He had a way of making these complex ideas so clear.
I know. He even compares people trying to earn their way into God's good graces to those who send anonymous letters. Like, they never really know if their message got through or if anyone even cared.
That's a great analogy. It's like there's no guarantee, no real connection. But with this covenant, it's different. It's a sure thing, established by God.
And that's where David finds his peace, knowing that he's held in this unbreakable promise.
So how does that apply to us, living in the 21st century?
Well, that's the cool part, isn't it? This covenant thing, it's not just some ancient idea. It actually has some profound implications for how we live our lives today.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, if we really believe that we're loved and accepted no matter what, it changes everything.
How so?
Think about it. It frees us from the need to constantly prove ourselves, to strive for external validation, to be perfect all the time.
Yeah, you're right. It's like all that pressure we put on ourselves to succeed, to have it all together, it can be exhausting.
Exactly. But the covenant offers this amazing sense of freedom and release from all that. We can embrace our imperfections, acknowledge those, and just be ourselves.
So it's less about striving and more about trusting.
Precisely. It's about resting in the knowledge that we're already loved and accepted, just as we are.
Wow. That is powerful stuff.
And get this, Spurgeon doesn't stop there. He goes on to talk about how this covenant actually impacts our actions, our relationships, our sense of purpose?
Okay, now I'm really interested. We definitely need to dive deeper into that.
Absolutely. That's where things get really interesting.
Okay, so remember those anonymous letters Spurgeon was talking about? How
Mhm.
some people try to earn God's favor, but never really know if they're getting through?
Yeah, he's making a point about how some folks approach faith like that,
Yeah,
all about striving and earning.
exactly. And he contrasts that with the kind of satisfaction that comes from trusting in God's covenant.
Satisfaction. So does that mean people who trust in the covenant just sit back and do nothing? Because that doesn't sound very satisfying to me.
That's a great point. And Spurgeon addresses that head on. It's not about being passive, it's about shifting our focus.
Okay, I'm listening. How so?
Those folks who are trying to earn God's approval, they're always striving, always worried about measuring up. It's exhausting, like they're running on a treadmill going nowhere.
Yeah, I could see that. Always trying to prove yourself, never feeling like you're quite there.
Exactly. But for the person who rests in God's grace, in that unbreakable covenant, they're free from that constant striving.
So they can face challenges with a different kind of confidence.
Exactly. It's like knowing your value and worth aren't tied to your accomplishments. It's about who you are, not what you do.
So it's more about who we are in relation to God.
You got it. It's about recognizing our identity is rooted in that covenant. We're loved, cherished, accepted just as we are, not because of what we achieve.
That's a big shift in thinking. Kind of goes against everything our culture screams at us, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. We're told we need to be more, do more, have more, all the time. But Spurgeon says true satisfaction comes from somewhere else entirely.
Right. He keeps hammering on this point about the covenant being everlasting. What's the significance of that?
It means this promise from God isn't fleeting. It's not something we can lose or earn. It's permanent. It's like this unwavering reality behind everything.
So it's like a foundation we can always count on, even when everything else feels uncertain.
That's a great way to put it. It's an anchor that keeps us grounded when the storms hit. You know, Spurgeon uses some powerful imagery to describe this. He talks about the believer standing secure amidst the wreck of matter, the crash of worlds.
Wow. Even when everything's falling apart, the covenant holds.
That's the idea, eternal security in God's grace. But you know, Spurgeon's not afraid to tackle the tough questions either.
What do you mean?
Well, there are parts of the Bible that seem to contradict this idea of an everlasting covenant. You know, passages about people falling away from grace or facing judgment.
Right, those verses can be confusing.
Spurgeon dives right into those knotty passages. He wants people to wrestle with Scripture, honestly, even the parts that are hard to understand.
It's like she's saying, don't shy away from the tough stuff.
He even jokes that those who try to ignore or explain away these difficult passages might need a trip to the ophthalmic hospital, you know, for their eyesight.
He really had a way with words, didn't he?
He sure did.
Yeah.
But underneath the humor, there's this deep respect for the Bible. And he really wanted people to engage with it authentically, to read it for themselves, to think critically about it, and to ultimately discover this truth of God's everlasting love that he was so passionate about.
It's inspiring. But what about those who haven't experienced this personally? You know, those who are still searching for that sense of peace and security.
He offers a clear invitation. He reminds everyone that the gospel is free. It's a gift available to anyone who recognizes their need for God's grace.
So it's as simple as flipping a switch. Suddenly you're filled with peace and joy.
He doesn't make it sound quite that easy. He's realistic about the challenges of faith. You know, he doesn't sugarcoat the reality of sin or the cost of rejecting God, but he emphasizes that God's love and mercy are boundless for those who turn to him.
It's that tension that always gets me.
Yeah.
Grace and responsibility. On the one hand, it's a free gift. On the other hand, we have to respond, make a choice.
Yeah, it's the heart of the matter, isn't it? It's not just passive acceptance. It's an active surrender. It's saying, okay, God, I'm letting go of my need to control everything. I trust you.
And that surrender, that letting go, that's where the real satisfaction comes in.
Exactly. It's not about earning God's love. It's about recognizing that we already have it and then allowing that love to change us.
So how do we connect this back to David? You know, back to David's dying song.
Well, remember Spurgeon brought up John Newton, the hymn writer, the one who used to be a slave trader.
Yeah. Didn't he have some dramatic conversion experience?
Well, there's this story about Newton having a dream. In the dream, he's given a ring, which symbolizes his salvation, but then he loses the ring and is totally devastated until an angel finds it for him.
Okay, Anne.
The angel tells Newton that he can't keep the ring safe on his own.
Wow, that's heavy. Like our salvation is ultimately in God's hands.
That's exactly what Spurgeon uses the story to illustrate. True satisfaction comes from recognizing that we're not in control. It's about surrendering our fears, our worries, our all those to a power greater than ourselves, just like David did.
It sounds freeing, but also kind of scary, What if we mess it up?
That's where the covenant comes in.
Hmm.
It's an unbreakable promise. It doesn't depend on us getting everything right. It's about trusting God even when we fail.
So it's about embracing our humanity, our imperfections, and trusting that we're loved no matter what.
You got it. And that's where the real satisfaction lies. Not in trying to be perfect, but in resting in the knowledge that we're already loved and accepted just as we are.
This is starting to make sense. It's not about being good enough. It's about recognizing that we're already enough in God's eyes.
That's it. And that changes everything. It impacts our relationships, our work, our sense of purpose.
Wow, this is deep stuff.
It really is. Maybe in the next part, we can talk about some specific examples of how this covenant plays out in everyday life.
I'm game if you are. So we spent a good amount of time talking about God's covenant, this whole unbreakable promise idea. It makes sense, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around how it actually works, in real life.
It's a big concept, that's for sure. But Spurgeon doesn't just leave it hanging out there. He brings it down to earth. He connects it to how we deal with all those we talked about before.
You mean those things that make us go, life's going great, although.
Exactly. Instead of letting those all those define us or drag us down, he says we can see them differently through the lens of the covenant, like it changes our whole perspective.
So like instead of getting all bummed out by our problems, we can face them with a sense of hope, knowing we're not alone in this.
That's the idea. It's not about pretending everything's perfect. It's about knowing we have this incredible source of strength to draw on no matter what happens.
Spurgeon talks about the covenant being like a well-ordered document, sure, in all its details.
Hmm.
How does that fit in with all this?
It shows that this isn't just some vague promise, It's intentional. It's a commitment from God to provide for us and guide us no matter what season of life we're in.
It's like, if we know there's solid ground beneath us, we can handle those shaky times a lot better.
Exactly. It's that bedrock of confidence that helps us weather the storms.
Okay, but Spurgeon also talks about the covenant and this whole idea of finding true satisfaction.
Yeah, he's big on that, isn't he? What's the connection there? He makes it very clear that true satisfaction doesn't come from chasing after temporary things. It's not about having more stuff or indulging in every pleasure.
So we should just deny ourselves all earthly joys, live like monks or something.
Not at all. It's about perspective. Enjoying the good gifts God gives us, but recognizing that they can't ultimately fill that void in our hearts.
So where does that leave us? Back to John Newton's dream about losing that ring.
Right. Remember, it wasn't enough for him to just have the ring. He had to learn that he couldn't keep it safe by himself.
It's like he was trying to control something that was ultimately out of his hands.
Exactly. And that's what Spurgeon is getting at. True satisfaction comes when we surrender to something bigger than ourselves, when we let go of that need to control everything.
So we let go of striving and achieving and proving our worth.
Exactly. We shift our focus from what we can do to who God is and what he's already done for us.
That's a pretty radical idea. But how do we actually put this into practice? How does this covenant thing play out in our day-to-day lives?
Well, Spurgeon says it affects everything. How we treat people, how we approach our work, what we prioritize. Everything flows from this understanding of who we are in relation to God.
So it's not just some heady theological concept. It actually changes how we live.
Absolutely. We let that covenant, that unbreakable promise, sink deep into our hearts. It becomes part of who we are.
Sounds like a lifelong process, a journey of learning and growing.
It is, but it's a journey filled with hope and purpose. And that's where we find that deep, lasting satisfaction Spurgeon talked about.
So for our listeners out there, what would you say is the key takeaway from all this? What should they do with this information about the covenant?
Well, I think Spurgeon would encourage them to think about all those in their own lives, to examine where they're searching for satisfaction, and to ask themselves what it might look like to really trust in God's covenant.
It's about remembering that no matter what challenges we face, no matter what mistakes we make, we're held in this incredible, unshakable love. It can never be broken.
And when we grasp that truth, it changes everything. We can face life with more courage and compassion.
A powerful message for any age. Thanks for walking us through this. It's been a fascinating deep dive.
My pleasure. And for everyone listening, remember, this is just the beginning. The journey of discovery continues.
Until next time, keep diving deep.